Hello to everybody who's watching. This is Avad. Um, so I wasn't gonna go over any more maps from this scrim, but then it was recommended to me that I might want to go over Hanamura because it seems like there was a perception of some difficulty on this map. Largely, what I remember is alerted rolling on the coast side of the map, just booping the enemy team around and kind of displacing them a bunch. But I mean, any excuse to go over an extra map, I'll take, honestly. I don't want to go over all 5 maps because I don't think there's a ton of useful information on all 5 maps, and I don't think you guys are going to watch 5 hours worth of VODs. I hardly know that you're going to watch 2 hours, so until, I see kind of like you guys able to engage with more content in that long form style, I'm just going to kind of hold out and see how I can do different ways of coaching and such like that. So we are going to, of course, talk about pathing first. So I'm going to try to make it very cut, clean, and dry. Hanamura, you want to kind of play at a faster tempo because there's a lot of open space for point A. So normally you want to come out of the left side. And I don't think there's any distinct advantage to the left side. It's just that the right side has a slightly longer sight line where you could see people coming from there from a little bit earlier if you're holding farther back angles, right? If you have a Widow back here, a Hanzo back here, even a Soldier or McCree, you can kind of like hold a better angle that's a little bit harder to hide. Left offers more space. It also offers an additional Mega over there. But when you're attacking, this space right here is going to want to be closed very quickly. You're not going to want to idle at this choke because being in a choke puts you at a disadvantage. You're going to want to push through this choke as quickly as possible in order to claim space on the other side. The checkpoints that you can look for as you go forward are this wall right here if you want to rotate through this building. You could also go forward to this rock in order to claim space, and then move forward onto point using the bell as kind of like a centerpiece to play around. The bell can kind of act as a pseudo shield if all of you stack up behind it in various positioning. Then you're able to basically not use any defensive resources while still being protected. Of course, tanks, you're going to want to still use your defensive resources in order to create advantages. You're going to want to try to push forward, close off angles, etc., etc. Apologies. When you push in, you want to be aware of what your plan is. So there's kind of 2 ideas when you're attacking into Hanamura, and they're both based off of how you want to set up your supports. So you can set up your supports and leave them at choke, and this is mainly fine for supports like Ana and Zen who have long range utility. And sorry again, hold on. Oh, Jesus Christ, I'm gonna get through one of these VODs one day without any of these small hiccups, burps, fucking sneezes. Anyway, but yeah, you set up your supports to choke on us, and this can be kind of good for long range healers that want to be able to seal off different entrance ways. So you see from this angle, you can see the right side of point, which will stop defenders from coming in from spawn sometimes. And you could also see a decent portion of point. This means that the tanks have to play in positions that allow their supports to see them. They cannot go up the stairs, and they cannot go too far to the right without, understanding that they won't be getting healing for a period of time. Tanks, if you're going to be pushing out to the right, I suggest that you continue pushing out all the way here because you're going to be back in LOS. Do not compromise your positioning. Like to say, if you're a Reinhardt, don't push all the way over here if your team's still going to be back at the door frame. Your team needs their shield. Although you can get healing over here, it's better to just stay stagnant and wait for your team to kind of do something, and just simply pressure if you're not going to be able to venture forward without healing on your own, or you're not going to venture forward with your entire team to get to this space over here. The second positioning is over on this staircase. So you can make this rotation in 2 ways, either by going along the coast side, this back side over here, in order to get your supports positioning. And there's 2, I think they're both megas, or am I stupid? No, they're both megas. There's 2 mega health packs, so you can really go high ground or low ground, but high ground's a little bit of a shorter path, and you're less likely to get booped off of it, so it has that little added advantage. But you can rotate along this path, and then set your supports up in this little cubby area back here. This cubby area gives great positioning for breaking line of sight of the enemy. You can hide around this pillar right here, and if you have to, you can drop back to over here, and as well as rotate to the Mega if you really need to. If there's a mobile tank, like let's say you're playing Hamid or Diva. One more time, I'm sorry. Never mind, I think it's gonna call me a liar. Okay. If you're a Hammond, you can quickly roll back into this mega area in order to get a burst of healing and then roll back into the action quickly, because Hammond is the fastest fucking character in the game and he goes Sonic speed. Tanks, what this means is that you're going to want to position on the with your back to your supports, of course, right? You're going to be facing the bell from this direction. Like I said, DPS, you're going to want to be a little bit fluid in how you do things. So you're going to want to be taking advantage of this high ground if you can. You're going to want to be taking advantage of this high ground if you can. You're going to want to be taking advantage of anybody who is not playing behind their team, etc., looking for maybe boot potential if you're playing someone like Pharah. You could also look for this side as a flank route option, and always mind this mini. If you have a character that has vertical mobility, you can kind of utilize this space over here to kind of retreat and grab the mini and then go back. And I say this for DPS more because supports don't really want to be making this rotation too much, because it brings them to coast and they can be vulnerable. And tanks don't really need the mini. It's not going to do anything for them that the supports couldn't have done for them. I apologize. So that's kind of how you can engage on this point. And again, you're going to want to use your different utility to kind of get through windows and create split pushes if you can. So if you have Pharah or even Baptiste who can poke through this window, and then, you know, as you push along, kind of take this space, do it. But the main understanding that I want you guys to know is that there's a kind of checkpoint system here as well. Is that you go to this pillar, you can go to this rock, you go to that door frame. You could even, if you go to the side, you can go to this red pillar, and then, you know, you go up and then you get into here. This is your next checkpoint, and then you come along here. Oops. Thank you, Athena. You can go to this checkpoint and then go to this checkpoint and then go to the bell. If you go right side, it's less of a checkpoint system because you're pretty much in cover the entire way. These pushes are much better for compositions that want to get close fast, or they want to close the distance without having to give up too much poke. So you can come along here and then go to the top side and go across, of course, bridge, drop down from this window is preferable, because the drop down just saves time. There's no real reason to go through the stairs. You just have to be wary, because if the tanks drop too soon and the supports are sitting up here and the enemy team has a pick DPS who can kind of one-shot people, then the supports will be vulnerable. But if the supports drop too soon and the tanks don't drop fast enough, then it's a little bit of a thing. Do not spend your time in game worrying about things like that, because the pressure of trying to get the timing perfect will make you mess up. You simply have to just go for it most of the time and then make adjustments. Like if I say, oh, you dropped too soon, okay, maybe this is what you can look for in order to drop more, you know, more together or whatever. Oh, you dropped too late, maybe you could do this so people know when to drop or something like that, you know. So if you come from this area, obviously you're going to be splitting the defender side. You're also going to have access to this mini, which is kind of nice. And there is another health pack kind of back here, and of course there's the one in courtyard as well. So again, if you're a Hammond, can be quite useful to go try to grab those really quick in the midst of a chaotic fight where your supports are kind of stacked up on healing someone else already. But you could play from these positions with your supports in this area. Now, this is kind of the same position that you're going to want to wind up taking for defense. Is you're going to want your tanks to be using these red pillars and this bell as kind of like a defensive standhold. Of course, you're going to want to try to block them off from getting to point, but this is going to be your retreat path, right? You're going to either go from pillar to pillar if they're being aggressive, or from pillar to pillar if they're kind of pushing you a little bit slowly, or they happen to be coming from coast side. Support, you're going to be wanting to play in this area. Burger had talked about this with Braxton's when we were playing this map, and I think we'll see him come to this area. But it offers you the mini. You're able to break line of sight and do various things. And it gives you a decent line of sight. If you need to see most of the point, you can push forward down the stairs a little bit, and such and so forth. But this is kind of the same position you want on offense if you come from this offensive right side, and defense if you're holding on the left side. This is where your supports are going to want to be most of the time. If you're playing Moira Lucio, also mind the rocks and this short wall over here. Tanks, very good kind of like tidbit for this map is these little cubby areas behind these walls. Especially this one, I like to sit here a lot of times so that my Ana can heal me up. And while this lets the enemy team kind of push forward, if you're holding your shield to kind of peek, or if your shield is low and you're kind of just holding right here, you can see once the enemies are pushing forward and quickly engage back onto them. There are certain specific engagement requirements that you're going to need to be mindful of, and that's going to be that you don't go past shields so that your supports can't heal you anymore. You know, you don't want to step too deep into the enemy team and then, you know, die because you couldn't get healing. You're going to want to be mindful that when you engage aggressively, the enemies are always going to be looking to hit big abilities on you. So flashbang, sleep dart, anti-nade, discord orb, they're going to want to be hitting you. They're going to want to hit, like, I'm just looking at the enemy composition, they're going to want to hit all of their cooldowns to try to burst you out with damage, right? So they're going to hit their overload and such. So just be wary that if you're in this position and then you suddenly go aggressive, you might have to flicker your shield. God damn it, you might have to flicker your shield for a moment. I tried to actually flicker my shield there because I'm an idiot. Just to try to block some abilities as you go for swings, and don't step too far behind the shield because you have to be aware of the fact that you're going to take damage. You could also use these corners to kind of cleave in damage. There's a Rhine tech where you can be not fully around the corner and your hitbox won't be really anywhere in enemy line of sight, but your cleave can still go through the wall a little bit. So Reinhardt players, I can show you that. If you don't understand how that works, just ask. But yeah, when you're holding this choke, it can be kind of good to remember these little cubbies as kind of a reprieve area. And also take advantage of the enemy's tempo, right? If you're going to be playing in some teams that don't push aggressively and just wait for their DPS to get picks, don't be afraid for everybody to just not peek them, right? Because the biggest resource that you're playing with at the end of the day is time. So if the enemy DPS don't want to push forward, or if the enemy tanks don't want to push forward and make space for the DPS, and the DPS aren't really getting any picks, your DPS can kind of sit behind this rock and carefully jiggle peek and only take duels at full health, and sit behind this wall and sit up here on this high ground and kind of disengage by backing up or going inside. And you don't really have to do anything because the enemies will push into you and they're just wasting time. And this might seem like a negative thing because you're not gaining any ult charge, you're not getting any picks, but as long as they're not making progress to the point, there's no real reason for you to have to put serious effort into contesting the enemies, right? All you have to do is put enough pressure to make them stay where they are, and you can win a lot of games like that. When they start pushing aggressive, of course, you want to do your normal tactics. You want to try to funnel people into specific areas. You want to try to deny them certain spaces. So you kind of try to, you don't have to deny them from going into here, but you want to be aware that once they go into here, you can try to contain them over here by hitting anti-nades through here, or do an early rotation to get back to point. If they're coming up on that side, you want to try to rotate as if you were defending point, right? Or you can try to hide under where your Ana is. If you're being really crafty and have a Lucio, you could all go under here, and then when they drop, you can come out. That is a super risky thing. I would not recommend doing it. But I still will give you the idea because I am a reckless coach. No fucks given. Okay, so yeah, on defense, you're going to do the same backtracking as you would on offense. You're going to back up to this rock and then to this pillar. Fighting in courtyard is a bit of an uphill battle for defense if they come through main courtyard, because as long as you can control this high ground space, the direction of point, and have some presence off to this left hand side, you can kind of put the enemies in a little bit of a bowl where their tanks can't protect every angle. And even especially if you have a DPS who kind of wanders out here or happens to be able to get specific high grounds, like if you have an Echo who can get up here or something like that. Remember, if you take this high ground, this pillar playing from this side can be very useful because you have a pillar to kind of close the LOS on and back up and stuff, and it's a little bit helpful. Same with the other side. But if you can kind of get that surrounding kind of defense where you have the far high ground, kind of above point, left side over here, and then maybe if you can happen to get someone over here, not all at the same time, but some combination of that as they push through, they're going to take so much pressure from so many angles. Their tanks aren't going to be able to protect all the angles, and their defense will most likely crumble. So just be mindful of the fact that you can kind of put people in a little bit of an ambush in this courtyard area if you set it up correctly. And sometimes this means just put your tanks forward and then have everybody be set up, and then as your tanks back up, and if you imagine your tanks as a line on the screen, you can kind of just see how eventually you would just put them into a bowl and you could just kind of collapse on them. It depends how good your visual imagination is and such. But that's just going to be about it for point A. So 15 minutes, hopefully not too bad, but let's get into the actual kind of what you guys did, talking about some more of the small stuff that we could improve on. I'm going to mute my mic just for a second to try to clear out some stuff. I'm not gonna lie, that was really creepy. I'm not in a party or anything, and then I just heard a woman whisper into my ear, "Are you finished?" And I was like, the fuck is going on? It's been so silent for a second. Alright. So, I mean, already we don't know what we're doing, which is kind of a problem. We want to spend as much time beforehand understanding what we want to do with our composition, right? So we have a bastion. Generally, bunker compositions like to hold in this high ground right here. This offers them two options and one big advantage. So the big advantage is the high ground that makes it difficult for most DPS to close distance, meaning they have to pick specific heroes in order to counter you. People that could access high ground, close the distance, get behind the shield and such like that. And we don't have a lot of shielding, so they could just poke the shield down. But this high ground is traditionally the bunker location. And what it offers you is a rotation back through Mega, so that you can get positioning back here and kind of bunker in this area back here. Of course, you want to be able to keep pressure on point, which is why the Hammond in this composition can be rather nice, because it allows the Hammond to kind of contest point and swing around while the rest of the team stays off point and just throws in damage and such. But if you're going to bunker up here, this means everybody's going to be up here. The supports are going to change their location to back here so that they can, heal the team up. They're going to be very dependent on the shield and very dependent on high ground's ability to mitigate line of sight. And so this is just kind of worrisome that, oh, and then the second thing, sorry. Yeah, it's worrisome that we don't know where we are, but we want to just, spend the time understanding the map and what we should be doing with the specific composition, so bunker compositions can play from this high ground. It also means that if the enemies push all the way through and they don't contest you, they just decide to contest point, that you could drop down right here and contest them from various angles on the outside as your Hammond, again, contests point so the enemies don't get captured or progress. There's always a duality to bunker compositions. There's one person who has to be the initial contester or the main contester, and then the rest of the composition, which is mainly just putting out damage and healing. So usually it's played with the D.Va, but now D.Va has kind of been absurd by Hammond in terms of being able to just long-term contest some objective points. So this composition is actually quite cohesive. Only thing I would say is that the support line doesn't have a ton of utility. It's mostly just raw healing output, which isn't a problem. It just loses out on some tools that could add to your team when it doesn't need so much overlapping healing if you play your defensive abilities correctly. So I'm gonna pick this angle to view from for now. SimTP is definitely getting disrupted right now. And as you can see, things have already fallen apart because Alert has just absolutely ruined the enemy team's plans. Good job on that front, and this is kind of that close-side abuse that I was talking about earlier, where Alerted just is rolling around at the speed of sound, not getting hit whatsoever. So one of the things that I did notice throughout the entirety of the map is, although Alerted was able to deal with the enemies on his own or kind of play solo a lot of the time, it was very silent and stagnant when it was happening. Well, that's not really an issue as long as Alerted is getting the job done. You want to build up habits for when Alerted isn't getting the job done, right? When Alerted can't just kind of 1v6 for a little bit, or even 1v3 or whatever, or just roll through the enemies and not get hit. So something that could be done here is that there's a little bit more engagement from the entire team as to what's happening with the remainders of the enemy. Late picks are super useful because they are basically setting the enemy team back. The regroup is only as fast as the last death. So even if the rest of the team has regrouped, let's say 5 people have regrouped, and let's say there was just this Lucio left, this Lucio dying means there's an additional about 10 seconds until he can get back into the fight, which means the enemy team either has to wait 10 seconds or fight a man down. And as long as there's time on the clock, they're going to choose to wait the 10 seconds. And those 10 seconds are juicy money seconds. That's basically how you win this game, is by min-maxing time and by being as efficient as possible, right? So when there's stragglers like this, you want to try to communicate where they are, and usually there's kind of some implicit understanding of where to look, because you know if there's a Lucio, he's probably going to try to wall ride out of window, but if Lucio's with someone, he might try to speed them out of main. So you want to kind of put your eyes in specific locations where they might try to escape, and try to cut them off at the pass while letting your more mobile heroes kind of like engage on them directly. So there's a lack of kind of like engagement here, and you can see it by the fact that Vel and Boop haven't really moved at all. They haven't really done anything. And although they're looking at choke, and that's where eventually you expect the Lucio and Zarya are gonna go, they're not. Here, let's look at their POV. They're looking, Boop is looking at the Sim TP, and Vel is looking to place shields, not a terrible thing, but there's just their character language, which is difficult to explain, but it's the direction they're facing and the positioning they're taking that shows a lack of engagement with the last 2 people are there. And that could mean that they are just, you know, not focused on it, but I'm pretty sure in remembering comms that this also means that it wasn't being communicated, right? If they don't know, they can't engage with it, and that's just kind of something that can be cleaned up by just saying like something like Zarya Lucio are the last to get out, or Zarya Lucio trapped on coast, or Zarya Lucio trying to escape off coast, or something like that. Simple communication that kind of helps explain what's going on, or things that you could take advantage of, right? Because enemies being trapped on coast is something that you can take advantage of. Getting rid of the TP is fairly important though, so it is good that it's going to disappear in a second. Okay, so they decide to reset, and that's something you can't necessarily I mean, you can, like, if you flash them as they're falling, it's hilarious. You could triple blink melee them, and melees count as CC because they have slight movement. I could tell you all about the fall off mechanics, like off of maps. CarQ has a video on it. I think it's about 25 minutes long or something like that, because the mechanics in this game for how CC works and how they consider people like the CC like deaths, the boop off maps and stuff like that, how that all works is very specific, and it's great. So if you're interested, just ask and I can kind of talk about it one day. Or you can go find the video, I guess, if you really wanted to. But why would you watch that video when you could watch mine, am I right? So again, you should always be scouting these compositions, because by this point you guys should know that they don't have a Symmetra anymore. Always holding that back button is just a reinforcement, so they're going to try to force coast again. Alerted is going to be able to largely disrupt them, and nobody's making any sort of rotations to react to the fact that they are coming along coast. Fel seems to be moving forward, but if you notice, this positioning is kind of poor. Supports forward, and although the enemies aren't there yet, they can surprise you very quickly. They have a Lucio, they can engage very rapidly and close that distance and take advantage of that space in between the tank and the support. And what you have to understand from like support and DPS perspective is that as a tank, you have to do a lot of work to make sure that the enemies don't think they could walk past you, right? And that's not always exactly true. So when the supports are standing in front of the tank or even too close to the tank, it could be kind of difficult to manage who's walking past you, because the enemies then gain an incentive, like a risk incentive. We don't have to go as far. We don't have to walk as far past the enemy tank in order to confirm this kill, right? Or we don't have to take as much damage, so because we don't have to travel as much distance. So you have to understand that your tank is always doing their best in some shape or form to make sure that the enemies don't just walk past them, right? And your spacing relative to the tank kind of factors into that, because it factors into the enemy perception of what they can do to your team. So the positioning like this isn't terrible because Moira can fade and sure Vel can throw a shield up, but if they speed in and they see that opportunity and they see you a bit far forward, they may try to take advantage of that. So again, this positioning is kind of aggressive in terms of how far forward everybody is towards the coast. Now it's fine if you want to take this pillar or you want to go forward here to try to cut them off a little bit earlier. Just understand that the enemy is going to kind of have the ability to surprise you. In this composition specifically, Orisa is a range damage dealer, and she doesn't want to really be close to a Reinhardt especially, so she would like this space. But if you wanted to somehow, like if your idea was to create space to boop, I can understand. Just understand that you are going to be giving the enemy team advantages that they don't necessarily need to be given. And, you know, although they're not there yet, they do have a Lucio, and you have to understand that they could close distance rapidly at any moment. I might have just rewinded again. Yeah, it seems like it did. Alright, I'm fast forwarding now. Pausing. Oh, look at the shield, it's so small. Oh my god. It's a little Hammond shield, like if you got demech. Oh, that's fucking adorable, bro. Alright. Okay. So this is still that very aggressive positioning while you guys push forward and kind of take advantage of the fact that you're just better than the enemy team, you know? Your positioning and your understanding of the map is not winning this game for you, right? It's just purely your mechanics and skills. And while that's great, there's a limit to mechanics and skills that you could predictably have, and there's only a limit to how much you can improve them in a short period of time. So it's much better to deal with kind of theory when you already have such good, like you guys have good mechanics, and that's why I'm focusing a lot on theory, not on your kind of like micro stuff, because you know mostly what you're doing with your characters. It's just in relation to the meta or to the game or to the map that you seem to kind of lose some understanding of what you should be doing, you know? Toxic on my way. I haven't gotten a lot of time to look at any of your gameplay yet, so I'm looking forward to getting to do that in the future. I hope I get to see you more in scrims going forward. Ooh, you're really struggling here, man. Big Auntie, I remember this being called out. So this is another instance where you can take advantage of the enemy positioning. They've kind of bottlenecked themselves in this area. So while they're in this space right here, you can kind of put a lot of damage and pressure into them using these little outlets. So they can only come from 1 of 3 doors. And this means you can contain them very nicely if you put the right resources in the right place, right? If you are constantly trying to pull them to keep them in this area, especially helps because it allows people to get into positioning. So let's say if Boop wanted to drop down and Orisa pulled in order to keep them in this area, which means you would just pull like right here-ish to kind of maximize the amount of people you could get into this space. You could kind of slow them and delay them. Orisa pull, if you hit it into the ground, adds a kind of slow effect and makes the enemy kind of wobble for a bit before they can actually move. So you could pull and allow Boop to drop, and then this anti-nade would get more value because your team would be collapsing onto it and the enemies wouldn't be able to heal, plus it'd get hit with a big CC and a lot of damage. So where's this pull going? The pull's going to top. Nobody can get to top and nobody's up there yet. It's a good predictive pull, but nobody can take advantage of it even if you do get to people. Another anti is going to come through in a little bit, I'm sure, and it's going to hit 2, I think. Yep, there's the anti-nade. Good use of the mini, but this is poor understanding. Well, let's see actually what you do first. Yeah, okay, so this is poor understanding of what the enemies want to do and what you should be doing, right? Because there are look at this. Do you fear for your life? Like are you afraid about what's about to happen to you? Because either a miracle will happen and your team will save you, or you're dead. So you just have to understand what the enemies want to do and kind of take advantage of what they're trying to do as best as you can, right? Because even if you didn't want to rotate all to the far side, you could hide underneath and hit a big anti underneath. There's clips of small hiding tactics like this. I'm pretty sure Philadelphia Fusion has a map. They maybe played it 3 weeks ago, I want to say, where Carpe hides on a cough map. He hides underneath the staircase or something like that, and the enemies drop down and he just waits for them to pass him, and then he uses high noon in their back and they kind of have to make a decision. But the enemies were literally right on top of him for a second. Like, if they knew he was there, if he had like maybe walked around too much and they had heard him, they would have absolutely destroyed him. But he took the risk of trying to be able to hit an ability so that his team could get the win. And the team has to understand, of course. You have to say like, oh, I'm gonna try to hit a sneaky anti or something like that. This has to be something that you understand team-wide, so that you can capitalize on it and make sure that you're protecting your Ana as much as possible. So team doesn't drop immediately, which is a miracle, so you're able to rotate out. But an aggressive team that knows how to push forward and engage would have just, you know, dropped down and instantly smacked you. Alright, so ults come out. You guys are better. You know your hero's better. What? I didn't even hit anything! Alright, whatever. So, let's go look at this for You'll notice a lot of times that I spend time with all of these icons on, and they could be very disorienting in terms of blocking your hero, blocking from what you're doing. But a lot of the time, I don't need to be seeing what your hero model is actually doing, because I can tell which direction the echo is facing and who they're aiming at right now, right? They're hitting Bongo, they're aiming at Bongo. So I'm using this as more of a relative positioning thing. The reason I'm telling you this is because relative positioning is very important in Overwatch, because everything depends on your teammates, and it depends on who you allow into what space, right? So this soldier being here means certain things for your team. It means certain things for how you want to work, right? Obviously, you can't be on the inside of the shield, because if he had any ability to aim in this gap instead of hitting the bell, he'd be doing damage to whoever was using this shield up close. So you have to push forward. Thankfully, there's nobody cleared out here, so it doesn't matter. Your shield just works in reverse now. But on my way is also on the other side of the shield and split from the team. So if the two DPS wanted to collapse, because the shield is over here, because the tank's over here, because the DPS are where they are, right? So everything is relative. Everything works with one another in kind of a tandem puzzle piece, and you have to be aware of that more than anything in order to understand, you know, how the team sphere works. That's toxic. That's I like it. Stop. Oh my god. I'm so stuffy, bro. I hate allergies. I hope you guys don't have allergies. Alright, so I'm pretty sure there's no chance for you guys to go into point B, so we're going to talk about it really quick. There's 3 different paths. There's main, there's high ground, there's coast side. So coast side is generally a fast tempo. You have to use a Lucio sim to get your whole team over there most of the time, unless you happen to have all mobility characters. But the problem with using all mobility characters to get across this gap, so once you cross the gap, you usually have to wait for cooldowns to come back, which means you have to just be sitting there. And if the enemy is recognized, they could just quickly engage on you and clean up a fight early. This doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. This just means if you're playing against enemies that are good, they're going to take advantage of you trying to close that gap. But if you have a Symmetra and you TP across, everybody can engage rather quickly. Now, why you want a Lucio is because you want to try to claim this long corridor space right here as quickly as possible. Unless you have a poke composition or some type of bunker composition. But if you have a poke or bunker composition, understand that the enemies can kind of just rotate in this areas back here and just break line of sight without actually having to do anything, because you're not pressuring point. So why give you alt charge? So, you know, you close the distance, take this space. Remember, the pillars are very useful. Supports, you're going to want to generally stay where you are. So tanks, you know, stay in this general line of sight. There's not a huge space that you want to rotate to unless you want to go back here. But this offers no real advantage rather than just staying on coast, because as you can see, those pillars kind of block a little bit. But I guess you could say that the advantage is that people can then hide behind the pillars and get healing, but this is also a very dangerous space to traverse, so only do it if you have the right abilities to. But I guess normally you'd play this type of rollout with a Lucio Moira anyway, so that you can get the speed boost onto point and then have mass healing up close while you brawl it out. So that's kind of that option there. You can come down main and it's a similar option. You want to close this distance as quickly as possible, get to these lanterns. These lanterns are your checkpoint. And then you want to try to use this to then push people back onto these high grounds back here, clear them off the point as much as possible. Allow them to go where they're naturally going, right? If people are going both left and right, then you kind of want to split up, off tank go one way, main tank go the other way, and you're going to want to corral people as much as you can just off of the point and split them as much as you can. They can regroup back here, but they can't see point from here, so most of the time they're just going to split themselves, and that's an advantage to you because enemies that are split means they can't protect one another, and that's just a small advantage, but it's an advantage you can take advantage of. Advantages. Is it real now? Is the word still real? The final rollout is going to be onto this high ground up here. The high ground, I apologize, give me 1 second actually. Alright, the high ground has several advantages. The first being that it's a high ground. You can break line of sight, you can leave your supports and long range damage dealers up here. Sorry, without putting them in threat or pressure of like the point itself. You only really need 2 or 3 people on point at a time, because I think 3 people is as fast as it goes. Now there is a very not complicated, but you can learn a lot about it in terms of how point pressure works in relation to the enemy team. The basics of it is, if you have more people on point than the enemy team, the enemy's respawn timers will go up. So if you brawl on point for a long time, the attackers actually have a larger advantage. The problem is that it's easier to sustain as defense than it is as attackers, which is why people normally have problems with these map types. But in a team setting, it's not as big of an issue, because the problem with this is cohesion, right? You have to have the support tempoing everybody up. You have to have the tanks being able to sustain their defensive abilities for long periods of time, and good teams can do that, right? So if you want to be a good team, you want to play this game well, in a team setting, these 2 CP maps are not going to be as big of a problem as it is in ranked, where you don't know when your Lucio is going to beat or why they're going to beat, when you don't know why your Moira is coalescing, or where your DPS are going to be, or when they want to do things, or how they want to go about things, right? This is where we can learn about one another and actually play together, right? So if you're on point longer, or if you have more point on people than the enemies, or than the defense, then the defense's spawners get longer, their timers get longer. And this could be a huge advantage, but it's not one that you necessarily want to be full investing in, because there are disadvantages to maybe throwing your Ana on point or having your Zen in the middle of the battlefield, You want to take advantage of having your McCree on the high ground so that he can high noon with a good angle once he gets it. But you can do this in 2 ways, right? You can either take this top corridor up here, which requires a surging push to clear out anybody who might be on here, and then you could simply drop down, or I mean, if you wanted to, you could go down the stairs, but stairs are for pansies. Why use the stairs when you could just fall? And then, like I said, you want to leave your DPS or supports up here while your tanks close the space. They can use this lantern, but they largely want to clear everybody off of point as quickly as possible in order to claim space and make sure that they have kind of like good spacing to work with on point. They want to make the enemies as uncomfortable as possible as quickly as possible so that they don't drain resources unnecessarily. The other option is to use this space up here. Generally, you want to be using both of these spaces in cohesion, because when the enemies are holding up here, this is a perfectly fine sightline for hitting quick anti-nades, or throwing in some abilities. Especially if you're playing Echo, you can come up with a team split to the left, come up here, hit stickies, a bunch of abilities while you just hover here, and then just kind of drop back down and rejoin with the team, or hover and float down to here. You could also use this to kind of do a trick maneuver, right? If you come up the stairs and the enemies start holding up here, you could come across and drop down main. New York did this a few times, season 2. I'm sure I could find a few VODs if you need. And then they came across main and they were just holding from this lantern position while their supports cleared into this back area, and then they acted as the defenders, right? And then the offense has to, or the defense has to drop, because you're putting point pressure, and point pressure forces them to take action. When you're defending this, it's generally best that if you have low mobility, you want to start on this high ground. And that's because if you're on this high ground, you can get to point, but if you're not on the high ground, you can't get to the high grounds. And if that doesn't make sense, I'm sorry, just ask. I could explain it more. But basically, if you're low mobility, you want to be hanging out up here. Supports this back cubby over here is a very nice area because it offers multiple ways to break line of sight, as well as spawn to get healing. It's not a health pack, but it is useful. It also gives you line of sight on the high grounds. You just want to be wary of anybody going close, because people going close can close that distance very quickly, because this is not a huge gap and you can't see them if your whole team is on the top high grounds. You definitely want to have somebody, generally a DPS or an off tank, kind of like checking back and forth for coast. You could also do a spread defense similar to the first point. You could put people in a bowl, right? You have some people on this high ground, you have some people on this high ground, you have some people up here, you have your supports in the back, you have tank on point, whatever you want to do in that kind of algorithm. But if you look from above head, and I don't know if I could get high enough that you could see it, but you'll notice that again there's high ground surrounding a low ground point, and you can kind of pressure the enemies from various angles as long as somebody's able to keep point pressure, and as long as your supports aren't compromised, right? Because supports are one of the only, or pretty much the only class that can't really protect themselves. That's really what's the broken part about Moira and Brig, is that they could really easily escape and protect themselves. Zen, Lucio, or Zen and Ana are the most fragile. Lucio can run away. Zen can of course just kill you straight out, and Ana has sleep and anti. But it's not easy. They're skill-based maneuvers for those three, and Baptiste has immortality, but that's a big cooldown you don't want to be blowing just on trying to save yourself. You want to try to use your positioning to save the important cooldowns for something else. So that's kind of just, I want to say a speed run, but I don't know how long that took, of kind of like point A or point B attack and defense. There's other little semantics about it that we'll kind of go over as we play the maps and scrims and such. Small things like how to use minis or utilize pit and stuff like that, but yeah, I'm just gonna leave it at that for now. Let's see how you guys attack into this and if there's anything to say about it. I'm trying to keep these VODs closer to 40 minutes for now. I think my goal is to try to get them to 30 minutes total. I don't think that's ever gonna happen, because 30 minutes mean I'm pretty much just watching some stuff straight out. There's some games that go 25, 32 minutes, depending on overtimes and how long you guys both attack. This is a shorter one, but of course, every time we come into a new map, I'm gonna have to I want to go over the pathing and stuff like that. I don't have to, of course. I don't have to shit. I'm kidding. But I want you guys to kind of get an understanding of what you can do with the map and how the maps work with different characters and stuff. Oh yes, okay. So this is the offense that kind of was in shambles a little bit. This is a good kind of like starting step for comms, but as you can see, you don't really have any tanking presence, and the reason I say you don't have any tanking presence is because Roadhog doesn't have any defensive abilities. His tanking presence comes from his threat of damage. Basically, you want to respect his LOS. So Roadhog's almost as much of a tank as Widow is, because you want to respect her line of sight as much as you can, right? But he doesn't actually have the ability to save anybody outside of hitting like clutch hooks or something like that. But once his hook cooldown is blown and somebody's poking in damage, he can't do anything but heal himself. And Sigma has a few defensive abilities with the shield and eat, and rock is a decent one. It's more offensive than defensive, but it can be used defensively. But Hog definitely puts more pressure on the other tank to execute the defensive abilities properly. And generally this causes struggle while pushing in, so we'll see some changes from you guys as you struggle to push in. Yeah, I mean, I don't really know that this is a suggestion for this type of composition, because you're not really running anything cohesive right now. You're running dive DPS, kind of like fast, light hitting DPS that like to combo together and get into locations they shouldn't be. Your support line is not bad. It offers some decent utility and still has good healing, but your tank line doesn't really do one thing or the other, so it kind of is just gonna struggle to keep up a little bit. Currently, I don't really know what to do with Hog in terms of I know what stuff I can look at in order to incorporate Hog into compositions, but if you guys wanted to play Hog, I'm not sure off the top of my head who you play him with as a tank combo. I want to say Reinhardt, because Reinhardt feels like the only tank who can kind of hold his own at all right now with how shields got nerfed in the last big patch that came through. But Hog in my mind is a little bit of a liability because of those shield nerfs. But I'll try to look at some stuff to make sure that if you guys want to play Hog, that I know what we can be doing going forward. So at this point, Alerted swapped onto Rhine and was trying to call for everybody to group up and get together, and you guys were doing it. It's just a little bit haphazard at this point because it was mid-map and you guys didn't have your bearings. Now, your bearings is something more mental than actually physical, right? Bearings can refer to an actual location or something you hold onto in order to kind of make sure you have sure footing. But bearings in Overwatch, generally, I refer to it as a mental state because it is your understanding and your mental foothold on what's going on and what you should be doing. So you guys were kind of each in your own head, but still trying to make call outs in certain ways, and then trying to figure out what each other was doing and read each other at the same time, but not knowing exactly what's going on. So these pushes are just a factor of time, I think. Just keep calming, keep talking to one another, keep looking at what each other's doing and working together to try to figure out what you like to do. You know, do you like to play an aggressive Reinhardt? How do you like to use your Rocket Sigma? How could we combo this together? You know, do you like to play you know, a Reddit Lucio, or do you like to play defensive Lucio? And how could this work together? I remember this blade being kind of difficult. The blade came out, and then the nano I think came a little bit late, and the comms were, again, like I said, a little bit messy. So I'm not really too worried about this right now. Just try to push together, try to stay together as much as possible. I'm sorry if the camera sucks. I don't really know where to be for this right now. I guess this is a pretty good angle. We can look at that EMP, I guess. Alright, so I don't remember if you called this EMP. I do remember you trying to hack the Reinhardt and go in on the Reinhardt, which was good. But again, since it was kind of like Alerted swapped to Rhine and then Boop was already back there, Boop might have been in slightly off positioning to actually specifically hack the Reinhardt. But with how their composition is set up, you would want to hack the Reinhardt from up here because they're stacked on kind of like center more, but they're kind of leaning towards the right side a little bit. Nobody has specific access to this high ground except the Junkrat. And while the McCree and Sigma could still poke you out, this does give you a second to hack the Reinhardt and then dip out, which gives your team time to engage. You can even hack the Reinhardt and kind of like drop down back here so that you break line of sight with the Junkrat and the McCree as you hack the Reinhardt. But okay, you come up here. Good. All according to my plan. You're looking for the EMP. Okay, so you get 5. And this is not bad. Generally with EMP, you want to prep the other big combo ability first. You don't always need a combo ability because EMP does a lot to the enemy team to disable them. But you don't get one of the people who has ultimate, and that's going to kind of turn the fight a little bit. And I think you could have with a little bit more to the left, but this was a great EMP because you got 5, and a 5-man EMP is good, you know. It disables all the shields and everything, and it lets you get damage through. So let's see. Alerted pushes through. And 2 of you get picked almost instantly. 1 to the Junkrat. Sorry, let me put these name titles back on. The other to the Brig. I wish I could rewind just by a little bit. Okay. Gonna go. Oops, gonna come through here. Okay. Let's watch the choke now. Okay, so this is good because you're pushing a little bit before the EMP comes out. It's requiring them to kind of be aware. The problem is that you kind of let people into your backline, and your supports are pushing very far forward. And I don't think the Lucio being this far forward is a problem, but again, Braxton, this is kind of the situation where you are in the team, and the enemies can take advantage of it to kind of dismantle your team, right? If you had waited and kind of delayed your own push behind your team, you would have noticed that Monkey was low behind you, and you would have been able to stay safe yourself, because are you the person who dies? No, okay. So, On My Way gets hit by Junkrat spam, and I think so does Monkey, but Monkey winds up dying to... No, because that's too far. So Monkey winds up dying just to the Brig of just being there. So when you're pushing as a team, you want to make sure that you're cleaning up people as they come a little bit. So as the main tank, and Alerted is not a main tank player necessarily here, he's just kind of filling in on Reinhardt so the team can play more cohesively. But you want to be kind of taking care of who you can, and Brig is one of those targets that you can clean up with 3 hits, as long as she doesn't, you know, like, get too much healing off or have too much support. But Brig is someone that you could definitely clean up as a Reinhardt, especially because if you move your screen as you swing, you'll get a lot more space cleaved, so you can hit a lot more people at the same time. This Brig is still pretty full health, and although she has her Inspire up, she's not getting any Moira healing. There's no reason she should be this high on health, right? So On My Way, you get hit by some spam. I would say a little wall ride would probably save you here. The same thing that Burger was saying, like, get used to a little bit more of using Lucio's wall ride, because it can be the biggest way to avoid damage, and that could help your team a lot, because then they don't have to protect you in certain ways. But then kind of Braxton's kind of doing this little fast push means that he also can't save either of them. And it means that automatically you're just in a 4-person push, and you get to pick on the enemy Reinhardt, which is good, but I don't think you guys are going to do anything with this positioning necessarily. Let's see what you do. The Boop is pushing forward, he's pushing out, Tyre gets 2, and that's the big part, right? So you lose 2, 1 from spam, 1 from bad positioning, and then you also don't catch the enemy Junkrat and EMP, and that allows you to get Tyre. So this is just a factor of, like, what is this is saying about death of 1,000 paper cuts or whatever. So this is kind of what that is, right? You miss 1 person with the EMP. Oh my god, just 1 person? How tragic. But then On My Way doesn't wall ride for 2 seconds. Oh, how tragic. But then Braxton's is just a little bit too far forward and can't heal Monkey. Oh, 1 person is missing 75 health. How tragic. But you see how it kind of trickles all together, and you wind up losing this push because of all these small things that the enemies can take advantage of. And this is gonna happen more frequently against better teams. They're gonna be able to take advantage of kind of like these small mishaps and misplays. So we're just trying to flesh them out as much as we can now, right? So this push is just over because of that. Not a bad EMP, not a bad idea, not a bad push, just small errors that wind up causing problems. One day I'm gonna have a nose, and I want to be able to breathe out of it. It's gonna be fucking crazy. Compositional switches. So don't forget during downtimes to kind of do pre-planning, call the enemy ultimates, and say maybe what you want to try to do with your ultimates. Alerted a little bit too fast here. You want to try to shield your team through this a little bit more. It's not like they're gonna get necessarily picked by this, but they could be taking some poke damage, and if the enemy had a Widow, they could. Not a main tank. Don't worry about it too much. That was a bad shatter. Worry about that though. Don't worry, you'll get it. So we can watch that back if you want, but you basically won that fight because the other team was worse than you. And I mean on a very micro level, right? Alerted is playing a slightly better Reinhardt than the other Reinhardt, and Boopery is playing a better DPS than the other DPS, and Monkey got picks that the other DPS couldn't get. Because you can out-mechanic them and you out-maneuver them or whatever, and because you know your hero's better. You didn't do anything on a team level that actually resulted in your win. And it's kind of okay to get those wins, right? A win is a win at the end of the day, but you want to be aware that the enemy teams that you're going to be playing against are not going to be our T1 team. They're going to be T2, I think we are. I'm kind of dumb. Don't blame me. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we're T2. But they're going to be better, right? You're not going to be able to outplay them on a one-to-one level. You're going to have to outplay them on a team level. Because if you could outplay them on a one-to-one level, well, guess what? You'd be in T3. And then you wouldn't be able to outplay them on a one-to-one level because you'd be in T3. And if you were, then you'd be in T4. And then you wouldn't be able to because you'd be in T4. And if you were, then you'd probably start playing on PC because you'd be really, really good at the game. And it'd be a waste of your talents. Or you would just dominate T4, I guess. I don't know. I don't know you. Anyway, that's the VOD. Hope you guys stay safe. Enjoy your coming week, and I'll see you in the next script most likely.